Welcome to Buckets, brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. This is your Monday Best Bets episode for Monday, March 25th in the association. We'll do best bets. We've got props for you. We've got sides for you. We've got totals for you. Everything we talk about can be found in the award-winning Action Network app. Make sure to download that right now. We'll also get in today some conversation about the Eastern Conference play-in tournament because, well, who doesn't want to break down Bulls versus Heat here on a Monday in March? Plus, we'll talk a little bit about the Boston Celtics and their position at the top of the Eastern Conference. And to do that, I'm joined by Joe Dellera and Jim Turvey. A reminder, please go to youtube.com/the Action Network. You can get all of our live shows, all of our great content. BBOC is going live throughout the week for March Madness. Those guys have been killing it. Go check that out. Our live buckets Monday and Thursday nights, 11 Eastern. You get Best Bets episode as well as big conversations, recapping the day in sports. Sean Little will be on tomorrow with you with Jay Money and Andrew O'Connor-Watts. Make sure to check that out. And on Thursday, I'll be back in the helm with Sean Little. We'll break down the night's games and get into all sorts of big topics, plus Best Bets for Friday. That's Buckets Live on youtube.com/the Action Network, Mondays and Thursdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. Like I said, I'm joined by the future Jays, Joe Dellera, Jim Turvey. We're going to do Best Bets for Monday. Let's start off. Joe, what's your best bet in the association?
I like Kristaps Porzingis over 18.5 points against the Atlanta Hawks.
Okay. Jim Turvey, your best bet.
I've got Rockets -9.5.
Nice. I also am on Rockets -9.5. I'm also going to take the Kings Sixers under 219 and Pacers Clippers on the under. The last time I checked, that number was actually not available in the market yet. Just popped 234.5. I'll take under 234.5 Clippers and Pacers. Let's start with the Knicks here, Joe. Kristaps Porzingis facing an Atlanta Hawks team that one of the many teams that I think in March I'm just like, why do you exist? Like, why are you still playing basketball? I don't know really why you're here. Why do you like Porzingis to go over 18.5 here?
Yeah, I think I'm convinced the Hawks are just playing basketball so I can hit a DeJounte Murray triple-double before the end of the season. But I like Kristaps Porzingis here. It's over 18.5. You can grab it at almost even money right now. Head-to-head, he's been really good against Clint Capella. What I'm looking at here for Atlanta, they don't have any – Okongwu's not going to be playing. Jalen Johnson's not going to be playing. So a lot of their defensive schemes are going to be really like centered around Capella. Capella has to play. And just given what he can do defensively, I think it's sets up pretty well for Porzingis. Even though he's never played him head-to-head while he's been a member of the Celtics, he's still averaging 20.9 points per game against Capella, and he's been over in 3 straight contests. Additionally, on the season, Porzingis is averaging 20.3 points per game, over in 61% of games. And even if we looked at this where we're like, all right, like, are we worried about a blowout? Are we worried about something like that? He's been a pretty big factor in if there is a blowout, and he's actually gone over the 18.5 points in 10 of 18 games that the Celtics have won by 15 or more points. So I like Porzingis here. Atlanta is a pace up spot for Boston. And I just think that matchup wise, this is a pretty good spot where Capella should have a pretty good amount of difficulty defending him on the perimeter, especially as Porzingis can kind of get off to a hot start with the way he can stretch the floor, the way he can make a couple threes. So I do like Porzingis to go over the 18.5 points against the Atlanta Hawks and Clint Capella.
Boston Celtics, I think, have clinched. No, they have not because the Bucks won tonight. They are within one of clinching the number 1 seed. So, Joe, my only hesitation there is that I do wonder if we're going to start to see Boston start messing with some stuff to get guys rest time. Like,
yeah,
they don't have anything left to win.
Yeah, I think
they'll keep winning because I think it's in their DNA, but I am like a little concerned about prop plays based off of the fact that just like Boston has nothing left to play for. They're going to clinch the 1 seed overall here within like 2 weeks.
Yeah, part of why I don't mind it is like just looking at the way he's performed in some of these big wins where they've won by like 15 or more points. So in most of those, he's played fewer than 30 minutes and he's still cashing this. So that's why I'm a little bit more comfortable just given the way that he scores and the way that Boston has won so many games like by margin. It gives me a little bit more like hope for the floor basically for Porzingis just because of the way that he scores. They do still run him through the offense. So I do still like him. And even though I do understand some of that. So it's like, it's not a spot where I want to take, some alternate lines, like a 25 plus or something like that. I just want the base.
Okay. Jim, the Houston Rockets have been absolutely red hot lately. Jalen Green is killing it. They have been great on both ends of the floor. Quite honestly, they are on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 game winning streak. They have covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of 12. The Houston Rockets have covered. They've been absolutely red hot. And yet, for some reason, well, I guess partly because Jabari Smith Jr. is suspended and Alfred Şengün's out for the season. They're only 9.5-point favorites versus the Portland Trailblazers, who started 5 rookies the other night versus the Denver Nuggets. Why do you like the Rockets here? Although it seems like a pretty obvious spot for them, -9.5 at home.
Yeah, well, you covered part of it. Is maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later. Right now, it seems like the league as a whole is not very consistent, and you are seeing guys pop up with injuries last second for both teams, both good and bad. But the Rockets are kind of in that beautiful middle where they are still alive. The Warriors lost again tonight. I think that leaves the Rockets maybe a game out right now. It's getting tight down there, and they are scorching red hot, and they're playing guys. And it is, this is not to say they are better without Alperen Şengün, but it is to say that they have found something with these lineups, with him being out, and like you said, Jabari as well. You gave the numbers on the exacts there for, the 8 straight and 10 of 11, ATS 11 of 12. And the last 6 of those all without Şengün, which I think some people, I think the market potentially is a little slow because the market thinks Şengün is excellent. He is a good player and assumed that it would have hurt them on the spread. They're the best team by far in cleaning the glass spread differential in the last 2 weeks. But they've been good all season. By adjusted net rating, they're actually better than teams like the Lakers and the Heat. They're right around the middle of the pack in the league. This is a team we were pretty skeptical of in the preseason, but I think have really outperformed what I pictured from them, and are now lingering around that playoff push. And I mean, they clearly went all in. There is no need for them to hit the brakes like the Jazz did last year and be like, actually we wouldn't mind a lottery pick. They're going for it. So they've been great at home all season as well. They're 25-11 straight up, 25-10-1 against the spread, both best in the league this season at home. Portland, meanwhile, they've actually been decent against the spread as well, but they are at far greater risk of pulling said plug and having, half or 3/4 of the lineup be out for any certain day. Brogdon and Sharp remain out. Grant was declared doubtful. Eaton, Simons, and Thibault are all questionable. With a team like this, the questionable tag weighs a little bit heavier for me if there's just no real benefit to having them, play, to be honest, having them in the lineup. They're lined up for the fifth pick right now. They're 2 behind Charlotte for that 4th pick. We know that 4th pick that 4th worst record in the league is huge for getting in the potential for the number 1 pick there. So I think everything lines up. I think this number, I'm a little surprised. It opened 9.5 or 10 and even took a little bit money to Portland. Now seems to be coming back to Houston. I think that's the side of this to be on. But if you do like to kind of, beat the market as well, I think this number is only going to get bigger based on injury reports and just as more people get around to betting on the Houston side of it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is just like, you're going to see this with a lot of teams where they can be winning. It's one of the reasons why the Kings lost to the Wizards was so bad the other night. Like, Washington tried to give them that one. Like, Washington very clearly pulled up on the reins, and the Kings still couldn't get past them. The Blazers will hang in these games, and then they will just kind of whatever degree they need to drift back, they will drift back. I think Portland's still playing hard. They really played hard versus the Nuggets the other night, but that was without Jokic and Murray, and they just can't match up. They're young, they're inexperienced, and they're playing out the string here. Behind tank commander Chauncey Billups, who, by the way, is just an incredible guy to get you high draft position. If you want to get a high draft lottery and get Chauncey Billups as your coach, I'm hearing that he might actually stick around next year, which
Interesting.
That's a choice. So yeah, I'm with Jim on this. I'm taking the 9.5. I grabbed it at 9.5. I think you're good at anything below 12.5.
That's the number I have as well.
That's the number I've got. So anything below 12, if you wake up here on Monday morning and it's 13, maybe let it go by. It's a lot. It's a lot of steam that you're chasing. 2 quick ones for me, both based off of trends. So, and we'll kind of get into this as a broader conversation of where March basketball is right now. I'm taking Pacers Clippers under. So this hits on 2 of the trends I've been tracking since All-Star, and they continue to hit, even though we started to see the numbers have come down so far on totals that we are starting to see overs hit. I think 4 of the last 6 nights in the NBA, we've seen overs hit more than unders. They've won the night. But the Pacers are among high free throw rate teams, and they're not calling fouls as much. So guess what? Those numbers are going under. Indy's actually been like a really red hot under. They've been one of the hottest under teams because the offensive ratings and the power rating is always going to kind of push those numbers over. And they were such a great over team the first half of the season, or 3/4 of the season. They qualify for that one as well. And then also under this kind of qualifiers, the Clippers have been a team that draws a lot of fouls. Now I'm a little bit worried about the Clippers in terms of their defense has fallen off a cliff and they're on a back-to-back. I also think that they might sit some guys because they need to, because it's March and they're tired, and that was a tough loss that they took. And so to the Sixers. And so I think there's actually a chance here that the Pacers go put up a big number, where the Clippers go under. I've got a couple of paths here, and this is a really high total for where the market has been. They are like 234.5 is not pre-officiating change, but it's not that far off. Like this would have been 245 plus probably before, based off of how high the Pacers games always went. But 234 is just extremely high with where the market is these days. So I'll take the under on that one. And then 76ers Kings. Kings were an over team for the first 3/4 of the season. And since the officiating change at home, guess what? Under. Last 4 home games for the Kings have gone under. Sixers are one of the top teams for the unders based off of the fact that they are, again, a team that draws a lot of free throws. I found kind of an interesting thing. They still kept a pretty high free throw rate even after Embiid went down. Not as high, but still a pretty high one, and those are getting called less. Sixers team total under has been not as good of a lock as like Hornets, but it's been good. So I'm going to go ahead and take the under on both of those. These are both trends plays, and the reason that these are both trends plays is like I'm not using a lot of the model these days. Like the model like gave me an indication on Rockets, but I was also like, okay, red hot team, I'll back. I'm not going to try. I'm going to try and follow the falling knife, I guess, so to speak. These games are just messy right now. This is a really perilous time to bet in the NBA. Not only, I think that there's 2 problems here with betting into March, Joe. One is we see this in NFL where, guess what? Eventually the books get better at capping. So it gets sharper and sharper, and the market gets better, right?
Yeah.
Like not only the books set better lines, but then the market the sharp bettors are finding more and more edges, and they get harder to find. And then on top of that, you have this variance where it's like, I mean, I think the Thunder game that I lost on today is like a great example of this. OKC has been a top 5 offense for months. The Bucks pick and roll defense is one of the worst in the league. Bucks played lights out defense. Best defensive game I've seen from them all year. Thunder just looked like they did not have it. Like they were just like completely lost. The Cavs lost by 30. Like there's just a bunch of games that don't make any fucking sense right now. And that's how it's going to be, because I scream this to the heavens. It's not just the tanking, Jim and Joe. I'll start with you. Joe, it's not just the tanking, and it's not just the injuries. It's a combination of those with like, they're just in the grind and the slug. It's hard to keep going right now. You're a month away from playoffs. You're not trying to finish strong, and some of the results are going to be really messy. This is an impossible time to try and handicap things.
Yeah, I think it makes it very difficult especially from like a spread perspective, just because you really don't know, who's coming out to play, who is going to be running like what type of rotations or lineups, who might be, just ready to pack it in. Like we looked at the Clippers today. Clippers weren't down by like all that much, and they were just like 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. They're like, nope, we're done. That's it. It's over. Like, we don't care. And it's like, it's very frustrating because you see these teams that are like, well, we know we're going to make the playoffs. We don't care. And then you have these other games where you just see these like really odd, like clock management things, especially late in the game, where teams are like, I don't know if they're like actively trying to tank that game, but then it's like the coaching decision is like, well, like, why wouldn't you call a timeout here? But then it's like, well, I guess maybe they don't totally care if they're going to win or not, or try to send this to overtime. Like that's not really what the goal is here. So I think it obviously creates some difficulties in terms of like, especially when you consider scheduling spots in terms of your capping, but it makes it even more difficult, I think, from like a player prop perspective, because you have these guys getting managed late in the game. Like they're popping on the injury report late. There's no like real reason. They obviously are giving a reason, but it's a surprising reason for us as bettors. And we have to try to navigate that and say like, all right, like what's going on? Why is this a circumstance? How do I make this pivot? And then is this team, like, I understand that let's say Memphis, for example, like if they have a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., if he's the only one that's going to play, you know, Bane's been back, but maybe if he's out or something like that, it's like, well, is Jaren going to play down the stretch of this game? If it gets out of hand like really early, or are they just going to be like, all right, you're done at halftime? So it makes it very, very tough, even where you'd say like, this guy's got an awesome opportunity to say like, well, I'm going to go back him because I just don't know what the rotations are going to be either.
Yeah, and to add on to the weirdness, it's not like you can. The thing is, like, you can almost auto fade the other way, but you can't do that either, because some nights they do decide to care, and some nights it's like they'll hang within the number. And like Memphis is a great example of this. Like, is Memphis going to pull Jaren Jackson Jr. at the half? Brandon Clark's coming back this week.
Like, why?
Like, why? What? I mean, look, honestly, I give him a lot of credit. Like, I like the fact that like Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson are playing in these games. Like, there's a level of professionalism that the Grizzlies are approaching the season with, despite it being lost, that I appreciate as a fan of the game.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's cool that they're like, no, like, our guys are going to play. Like, they're healthy, they're going to play. We're not sitting out Desmond Bane because we can.
Yeah,
Desmond's going to play. That's cool. It's just very hard to figure out how to cap these games. Jim, you kind of mentioned that you had a bunch of leans on this slate, but I got to tell you, unless you are just like, yes, this is the play either for a trend or I guess based off of the model or the spot, I do think that any sort of lean, if you're not convinced to make a bet, it's just like, let it pass on by. I don't think it's worth betting into these markets.
No, I agree 100%. They're leans because it just is a scary time to bet. You can decrease the unit size, or you can just kind of pass on some. Like Chicago intrigues me, but that line's already moved a little bit. Dallas and Utah. Utah is one of these teams where they can beat like a contender one night and then they can lose by 40 to a mid-tier team. That Utah makes absolutely no sense. Memphis, Denver's got Jokic and Murray is questionable right now. Would make perfect sense for them to sit them out. But Denver seems to be, like by spread differential, they're right up there for the last couple of weeks. So like when we look at these, I think it's so tough because it's almost like week what do they play in the NFL? 20 weeks is these days. The final week of the NFL where you think there's motivation going one way, but half the time that just kind of messes with your head and goes the other way. So like if we look at spread differential the last 2 weeks, Houston, as we said, is doing awesome. That makes sense. They're motivated. Boston is second for spread differential. This isn't just net rating. This is against the spread. Yeah. They're blowing teams out. Like there's no reason for them to be up there. But then you also look like in Atlanta is the 8th best team in spread differential. Then at the bottom, the Clippers are doing terrible. That kind of makes sense. They're in a spot where it doesn't really matter too much. They're kind of locked in the 4-5. But Cleveland, they're very much they just got all their players back. They should be great. Chicago's down there, even though they have motivation to win games. It's very hard to pin down exact motivations. And then on top of all the wonkiness of injuries and rotations, and there's just so much chaos right now that it really is, sometimes in the heat of the season, we'd come on here and Joe has, 5 best bets and I have 3 and you've got 4 and we give out a dozen for the day and it's awesome. This is like, we've each got one. I do think the Rockets is a good play. We overlap on that one even. So, it's just a time to be quieter, enjoy the March Madness, bet on that a little bit more, and then have the NBA on the second screen and just kind of see what goofy stuff can happen in the NBA because it's a scary time to bet. Honestly, what I'm doing is kind of trying to think ahead to, I'm always thinking ahead to futures, and that's kind of how I'm looking more as I watch these games. To be honest, it's kind of big picture stuff like that.
Well, let's hit that to recap our best bets. Joe likes Porzingis over 18.5 points versus the Hawks. Jim and I are both on the Rockets minus 9.5 versus the Blazers. I've got Kings Sixers under 219 and Pacers Clippers under 234.5. By the way, the Atlanta Hawks, congrats to them. They are no longer tracking to be the worst ATS team in our recorded history since 2003. They are currently third. The lowest mark is 33.3% by the 2003 Magic. The Hawks are currently on pace for 34.3%. So this run without Trae Young has helped them get over the mark in terms of covering the spread recently, as Jim mentioned. All right, let's talk about the Eastern Conference for a bit. Let's start at the top, and then we'll hit the play-in on the way out. I've been talking about this a lot, and we're going to talk about it again because I do think it's the biggest question when we look at the East, which is Boston. If Boston had not, I'm trying to think of this. If Boston had not been to the playoffs before, and this team had come together this season, right? If it was like they traded for Tatum and they traded for Brown, they traded for their entire starting five. I think we'd probably rate them higher and have more confidence in them. And that makes me wonder if we frame it like that, if maybe we're missing something in terms of this. It's going to be hard for anyone who's analytically minded to do anything but bet the Boston Celtics once the playoffs begin. They have the fourth best SRS in league history. For those of you unfamiliar, SRS is a simple rating system. All it is point differential versus strength of schedule. How good were the teams that you played and how much did you win by? That's a pretty good, strong measure of how good you are. That's a way better measure than record, okay? Boston has the fourth best. The top 3 teams won the title. The 5th team won the title. Like, it's just teams that won the title that are this good. But there's 3 main problems with Boston. We've seen them fail repeatedly to get a title, even though they've made a finals and 4 conference finals in the last 5 years. Their clutch time performance still brings questions of, man, their offense just falls apart sometimes. Is that going to happen in the playoffs again? And honestly, the one that I hear the most is you cannot win the title if you do not have a top 5 player. And Jayson Tatum is not considered a top 5 player. He's not like way off, but he's like, I'll say this. What's interesting about him is if you ask people the average rank of him, he's probably like 7, maybe 6. But if you also ask those some people, how confident are you that he is not top 5? There would be a high level of confidence in that selection. They'd be like, yes. Like, how strongly do you feel Jayson Tatum is not a top 5 player on a scale of 1 to 5? Most analysts would be like 4, 4.5, maybe a 5. He's not a top 5 guy in the NBA right now. And the differential causes some real problems. Jim, let's start with you. Where are you at with Boston? How do you want to bet them? How do you want to fade them? What's the way to deal with what looks like the Boston Celtics being a juggernaut in the Eastern Conference?
Well, I'll start off by saying that, 5 is such a nice, clean number that we always talk in 5s and 10s, right? But it's almost always a top 3 player or even 4. Like, it's a tier. It's more of a tier than the exact, like, number 5 being essential. And I don't think you'll find anyone following the league right now who thinks that Jayson Tatum is in the top tier. He's a great player, but he is not there. And I think you laid out the case perfectly for why we're all skeptical. And I think there is very good reason to be skeptical. And I think that we'll have to see. It certainly looks this way now that the market as a whole, or the sharps, or whoever is pushing that number is trusting the adjusted net rating being historically good for this Celtics team. And I definitely am with you on being more skeptical. And I think there's actually a lot of ways to fade this Boston team. In the early rounds, I think we can get creative. We can look at, series spread. That's always a favorite of yours, I know. We can also look at individual ways to bet game to game, looking at certain games and looking at, I don't usually bet win bands. Like, that's like, say it's Heat Celtics, Heat to win by 1-6. That's not something I often do. But I think sometimes against the Celtic team, if we think that it's going to be, a fourth quarter, bad offensive set from Boston that takes game, we can put together little same game parlays that are, a fourth quarter under plus, Heat to win by 1-6 points. Those are, we've just seen so much of this team. We know, it's almost like a mini trend that's hyper focused on Boston. I also think that there's, just beyond the bottom as we go on, I think there are multiple threats to Boston. I think we'll probably talk through all of them. Just in brief, I think that New York, we keep coming back to them. If they get healthy, I think all of us are going to be looking that way. The Sixers, Embiid's practicing this week. To me, that's the least appealing of these 3 I'm going to throw out there. But I think, because there's so much unknown, if Embiid comes back rusty and he looks like his, kind of just not perfect in the playoffs, Embiid, I don't think they're going anywhere. But if he comes back and we even get like a little bit of a look at him and he looks like he's rested and not rusty, then that becomes a very, very interesting look, because I think a healthy Embiid and that Sixers team can absolutely stick with Boston. I think the most interesting, and I've been chatting for a little bit here, so I'll throw it back to you guys before going too deep on it later. I think Milwaukee is maybe the most interesting team that's sitting right in front of us, and we aren't paying enough attention to right now.
I've been pretty adamant that Bucks are a no for me. It's really funny because they beat the Thunder. They beat the brakes off the Thunder, and I bet the Thunder. Okay. This is what I don't understand. Smart people are like, oh no, March basketball is a disaster zone. You shouldn't take anything from it. It's all messy. None of it makes any sense. Same people. This just shows you the Thunder are not ready for the playoffs, and those Milwaukee Bucks are peaking at the right time. Are you fucking serious? The Bucks have told us for 6 months who they are. Now, I will tell you, I watched that game in detail, took notes, the whole thing. Best defense I've seen Milwaukee play. If Milwaukee had played like this the rest of the fucking year, I would be like, let's buy the Bucks, man. I love this matchup for them. They're going to, I love Giannis versus I bet the Bucks 2 years ago versus the Celtics. They should have won that series. If Chris Middleton doesn't get hurt, they should have won it. Yes, let's go. Let's ride this Bucks train. I have 6 months of data that says they can't defend. And if you're like, well, Matt, they've been better under Doc. They have been. I've talked about that. I said they would be better under Doc. They've been better. This is a bottom 10 defense guarding pick and roll. You know what they allow a shit ton of at a very high percentage? Mid-range shots. Do you know what you don't want to do in the NBA playoffs? That's what you don't want to do. Because Jalen Brunson and Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson, I don't believe I'm saying that, but it's kind of true, and Donovan Mitchell and a bunch of these teams, Tyrese Halliburton, are going to tear you up. I don't know what to do if Milwaukee just, let's say that the Milwaukee carries over this performance versus the Thunder, and they play this level of defense over the next 4 weeks. Everything that I have come to know about the NBA says I should disregard it, because none of these fucking games matter. We should be done. The season should be 66 games. None of this is relevant. But if they do it, then it's going to be well, yeah, but they just got better. That's what it's going to be. It's they got better. I can't get there. I just can't. Also, I will tell you, I don't love the vibes. I just personally do not love the vibes. Damian Lillard is not hiding that he is not thrilled. He's there. He's doing the job. He's a professional. He's paid to do it. It's very evident that he would have preferred his preferred location for a number of reasons. That's what he would prefer. I have a hard time buying into a chemistry gap that big based off of this problem, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the Bucks are just, look, Giannis has been amazing. He's going to finish top 3 in MVP. He has been sensational. He's been incredible. Joe, I am not willing at this point to throw out what has historically been the meaningful part of the season, because Milwaukee looks a little better in the part that historically is not relevant.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is looking at this team. Obviously, that Giannis has the pedigree to be MVP, best player on the floor in literally any series. And I think in the Eastern Conference especially, he would be the best player, period, in every series that Milwaukee could play in. Yep. There's no question about it. And then I think the thing is Middleton has looked better. Middleton had a triple-double today. If Middleton's going to do that, that is an incredible number 3, because what they're doing too is what Brook Lopez is going to bring. Damian Lillard is kind of what you said, some of the maybe there's some chemistry issues. Regardless, Damian Lillard is better than a lot of teams' number 1s, and he's their number 2. So I think that's the other thing. So it's if you're Milwaukee, you could go into a lot of series and say, not only do we have the best player in the series head and shoulders better than your number 1, we also think our number 2 is better than your number 1 in a lot of series. So I think that maybe that's part of why there's a little bit of willingness to buy what Milwaukee has. And it's just these things with these teams, when they have these, these superstar players that kind of come together, it's always well, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. And then maybe okay, maybe we do need to buy this, even though it is March, even though it is a little wonky. Maybe we do need to buy what they're putting out there, because it might have just taken this long for it to really kind of gel on the court. And that's the thing with say for Phoenix, for example, the whole thing was like, well, just put the three of them on the floor together. Like, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. And it's been like impossible to have the three of them on the floor together. Dame and Giannis, at least, they've pretty much gotten to play the whole season together. And then now you're seeing how it kind of meshes with a relatively healthy Chris Middleton and Brooke Lopez. And I think that the results have been good. They've been promising. But I do understand a little bit of the trepidation saying like, well, it's March. Like, do we want to buy this when we have all of this history over the course of the season? But I do think that you can kind of temper that a little bit with the fact that we haven't had, like, it takes time for these like players to gel when they're normally like higher usage players, and maybe that like they're there now in March, maybe that is enough. And you can say like, all right, well, like the path means right now they're the 2 seed or the 3 seed. They don't have to go through Boston until the conference finals. If somebody else like bangs them up, like whatever, like they're going to have the number is still good right now because Boston is being respected so much by the market.
In part based off of Philly's slide, which of course reverses itself if Embiid comes back.
Yeah.
The statistically probable matchup based off of Basketball Reference and dunks and threes is a 2-7 matchup versus that features the Milwaukee Bucks versus the Miami Heat. Jim, let me ask you that because we talk about the bracket all the time. Do you want like a Bucks future if the Heat are on their side of the bracket?
I am not as scared of this Heat team in particular. I know that they, come postseason they've done it before. And I think that, the numbers that they're at is actually long, but that matchup would not be enough to scare me off. But I think you do bring up a very good point that, we heard Embiid is practicing this week. I think it doesn't hurt the part of the Bucks number that is keeping it, as short as it is the Celtics. Like that's not going to change. So I don't think it's going to get I don't think we're going to get down to like plus 200, which kind of brings me to why I quote unquote like the Bucks here. I head to head, I'm not going to, if this was truly, even odds Bucks or Celtics, I'm going to go with the Celtics. Although I think it would be close, but that's my point. Right now, the books say that the Celtics are more than twice as likely to come out of the East as the Celtics. And I don't think that is a correct representation of how I see the East, the power in the East. Joe brought up a great point about Giannis being the best player in the court. If we talk about, historically, the 5 best historical net rating teams win the title. Historically, the best player on the court wins the title, and we see it time and time again. And it's actually pretty rare that a team like Boston that has, a top 10 player, a top 7 player, and really good depth, those teams don't do as well. The Bucks also, they have the second best net rating against top 10 teams. They lack consistency sometimes across the board against other teams, but they have that ceiling to beat some of the top teams. They also have the second best clutch numbers, second best clutch net rating this season. And that's kind of been a theme for this Bucks team in general. Then you add in seasons past, then you add Dame to it. That's only going to increase in the postseason. And, those tight matchups in the postseason, Bucks Celtics, if it's coming down to the wire, I'm going to want the Bucks in a tight game much more than the Celtics. So I'm not rushing to lock in this number just yet. I actually really love the way you found for all of us to, in our Celtics skepticism to potentially, combine all of these, the Embiid return, the Bucks potential feasibility, our love for the Knicks. And I think that's the best way to approach it right now, to be honest.
Yeah, and what you can find in the market right now is there's a Celtics no at a certain book at plus 105. So you can actually bet on the field versus the Boston Celtics at a plus number, plus 105. Yeah. That's everybody else, which, look, I don't think that the number's wrong because it's built off of the minus 140 for the Celtics to win the Eastern Conference because the Celtics are, they are that good. It really is. It's a fascinating question here. Teams that have been this good historically in the regular season win the championship. Boston has been that team. And it's fascinating to me that we don't believe it. That I've battled with Celtics fans all year on this, and they've been mad because I'll say things like, yeah, they're like this. This is what their clutch numbers are, but it doesn't feel like that. And they're like, oh, it doesn't feel like that. And I'm like, that's the point, is the reality says one thing. The objective reality says one thing, and yet all of us are kind of yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I think it's because we
need to see you do it.
We've watched them. We've watched them so many times. And I think the other problem is too, it's I love Drew. part of why Milwaukee moved on from Drew is because the offense got stagnant. I understand that like he's a cog in Boston, and that part of what they do so well is the ball movement. And they have so many players that are like relatively unselfish for the most part. But then you do get to those clutch time minutes, and it's like the ball sticks. It still gets sticky because they like revert back to what they've been doing. And it's like, well, the Jays are just saying like, well, it's your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. And like, that's exactly what they like, that they've done so well, like, or they've done such a good job of not doing that for the majority of the time. And that's why they're blowing teams like doors off. But then like when we watch them in the clutch, they revert back to that. And the guy that they got, like, which I think was still a great trade, like to get Drew Holiday, but he's not like, they're not giving him the keys to facilitate the offense like in the clutch minutes. And that's still the concern, I think.
Well, and Matt, you brought it up, I think, a couple weeks ago, but like the Celtics numbers are better in the clutch, but when you look at clutch against good teams, it starts to be a little bit more pedestrian. And I think that is far more relevant for the postseason.
By the way, just on the performance versus top 10 teams, and like I think it's a good metric, right? Like how do you do versus the elite squads? Milwaukee is number 1 in point differential, in part because they beat the absolute living shit out of Boston when they were in a bad rest spot with a 5.1. They are interestingly 3rd in win percentage versus those teams. They are 13-8. My point here is not to say we should consider these other teams more, but just like the interesting way of how we frame things. Like we're like, okay, but hey, look at the Bucks record versus these good teams. OKC has the best record in the league versus those teams with 14-6. And yeah, everybody's like, meh, yeah, throw them out. No shit. Like it is the common consensus right now is that the Thunder are a first round out. I am not saying that they are not a first round out. I am saying that I don't know yet. I'm saying I don't know. I think that we are too quick to make decisions on OKC. We are deciding things way too much on OKC.
Yeah.
Like we're just ahead of ourselves, I think, a little bit. Number 2 is Boston. That makes sense. Number 3 is Milwaukee. Number 4 is the Los Angeles Lakers. So is it a good metric or is it not? And so like that's
well, I think it might be because if the Lakers if they got dropped, parachuted into the Western playoffs, I think a lot of us would be intrigued by it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the play-in tournament and talk about those Heat some more because I think it is an interesting kind of question. So currently in the standings, the Miami Heat are rustling around in that area. They got a very good win over the Cavs on Sunday. They are 39-32. They are tied with the Sixers at 39-32. The Pacers are 1 game up at 40-31. The Magic took a tough one to the Kings this weekend. They are 42-29. 2-game gap. They've been playing pretty well. We'll see. They have to really fall off. Not like a ton, but we are running out of time for a 2-game gap to disappear here. Although the Miami Heat do have tiebreaker over Orlando. It is almost definite that we're going to be the 9-10 is going to be Bulls Hawks. We can't get rid of Atlanta. We're just not that lucky. Brooklyn has decided that they do not want any part with it. We have to deal with it. Like it should on the 9-10 game should honestly be like the Atlanta Hawks Memorial game. So we're going to get Bulls Hawks in the 9-10. 7-8, if Embiid comes back, I think if Embiid comes back with any sort of like Embiidness, then they're 6. That's my opinion. It's like Sixers, I think would snap back pretty quickly. They're already starting to rebound a little bit here. Yeah. Like they are showing some signs of life here. And that would put us in Indiana 7 or 8 versus Miami, who I don't think falls any further than that. I am interested here, Jim, because you kind of mentioned this about Miami. Last year, the Miami Heat had a negative point differential and made the NBA Finals.
It's unbelievable.
Minus 0.3. They were 3 minutes from being eliminated in the second play-in game by the Chicago Bulls. And yet they made the NBA Finals. This season, they are much better. They are plus 0.7. They are a whole point better in net rating, in point differential this season. I am just of the belief. I was listening to something Gabe Vincent said today on JJ Redick's podcast talking about the Boston Celtics series. And one of the things he said was like, we're just really built for those kind of playoff games. We're good at making teams play the way we want. That was what he said about the Heat. Or he said like, it was past tense. Like we were good at making teams play the way we want. And that's kind of my belief here is like, yeah, you're absolutely right that the Miami Heat are not a good regular season team. They're just not. they have a remarkable ability to make you play the way that they want to play, which they are very good at. That's kind of the difference between if you were like, but wait, Matt, you're talking about the Bucks are not good and they're actually a good record team with good numbers and you believe in the Heat. It's because I don't think the Bucks control their destiny as much. Miami's very good at being able to just drag you. They drag you into a cage and then they make it a bare knuckle fight. And I saw the Celtics do this in the early 2010s, where it was like with the Pierce and KG crew, they were not the 2008 team at all. Time had passed them by, but they were so good about dragging you into a single possession game and then being like, we're going to be better than you for 5 minutes. That's where we're going to win, is we're just going to wear you out. Why are you not as scared of this Miami Heat team, Jim?
So that actually leads perfectly to my skepticism, and it's a very narrow skepticism. Basically, the cap is looking at the potential, the exact 7, 8, 9, 10 of this East playoff. I do think you're right. We're going to get Hawks. We're going to get Bulls in that 9, 10. I like the Bulls, especially at home. What I think is a little bit more interesting is the possibility of the Bulls taking out the Heat if we get Bulls Heat in that second game. So since November 29th, and I'll tell you that's not a cherry pick date. I'll tell you why in 1 second. But the Bulls are 29-23. Miami's 28-24. They basically have matching net ratings. They've been very similar teams over that stretch of time. It's not a random date. It's when Zach LaVine went out of the lineup for Chicago and Kobe White kind of had his renaissance. He's now actually, I don't know if people have been watching the most improved player market, but he is very much alive. So hopefully you grabbed him when the number was a lot longer. I still think Maxey is going to hold on, but it's now like a minus 200, plus 150 type of deal. And he has been outstanding. And this Bulls team has overall been pretty solid. And what I think is maybe most interesting is that the Bulls have been one of the best clutch teams. Going once more to a side tangent to an award, DeMar DeRozan looks likely to win Clutch Player of the Year right now. He's overtaken Steph Curry in that market. Another of the awards that is actually live right now. It's about minus 200 plus 150 there as well. And it makes sense. The Bulls have a plus 21.4 net rating in Clutch, which only trails Bucks, Nuggets, and Knicks. The Heat are minus 15.9, which is ahead of only the Pistons and Wizards. So if we do get this exact matchup, if this we're going to drag you down to a one possession game, 5 minutes to go. Maybe the Heat do have that postseason ability to kind of step up, and they've done it plenty, and they did it to the Bulls last year. But if there's some of their shooting variance wears off that dragged them through the postseason last year, I like a potentially right now the Bulls are plus 300 to make the playoffs. I don't think we need to bet that now. I think we can make sure everything lines up the way we want it to. We could do a money line parlay. The Bulls will be favored in that game against the Hawks. I think we could probably even get away with the spread there. I think we're all going to be all over the Bulls and fading the Hawks in that 9-10. And then, roll that over into a money line against Miami in Miami potentially for that 8-9. I think that is a very interesting look, and that Chicago I think is very live to take out Miami and do the Celtics potentially a big favor.
It's interesting. I gotta tell you, I think that's an interesting take. I think it's an interesting position. I think so. My the way I lean is the Heat. We're not that lucky.
We can't get rid of them that easy.
We're not going to get. Here's what will actually happen, Jeff, is the Heat will somehow beat Indiana in the 7-8, get the 7 seed, and then the Pacers, who I am more excited about than almost any other team for what they could do in a first-round playoff series, not to win, just to hang and be fun and it'd be great. They will either feed them to the Celtics or the Bulls will knock them out because of what you're talking about.
We'll get Bulls Celtics, and the Celtics will win all 4 games by 25 points, and it'll be a complete waste of a series.
Yes. That sounds much more like what we get.
Yeah, that sounds
right.
Yeah.
Rather than the Heat are dead, long live the Heat. I think it's an interesting question, but I will say if you buy into Jim's idea, I will counter with this though, Jim. I think if you believe that there is a better chance than the market reflects of Miami missing the playoffs entirely, I think you probably should bet Boston. That's
to come out of the East.
Yeah, because for me, that's what it gets down to. It's Miami's a huge part of my skepticism. Is
interesting.
Is eventually the Celtics will have to run up against Miami, and they're going to have to do it against that team again.
I think that
And
speaks
that's gonna be a
to
challenge.
I think that speaks to how much we love getting plus money against the Celtics then, because the Heat are almost no part of my cap against like in the field for the East, and I still like the number. So I do think there's a lot to like on field against the Celtics.
I do.
I'm interested in Joe's thoughts on this.
I do understand like your point though of like seeing Miami play Boston. Not really that I think Miami can really hang, but like Spo is such a good coach. I think that he could maybe expose something that a better roster, a more talented roster could like see that and be like, oh, that worked. Like, let's try that. I think
It's a great take.
If you take Miami from like that perspective and say like, like if they're the 8 seed, then I feel better about like some other team beating Boston. It's to me, it's not because Miami can beat Boston, but it's because they might like be able to lay out a blueprint for how to beat Boston with like a better or more talented roster. I do think though that the number right now, like when we're looking at the Eastern Conference play-in, the way that we're situated, Philly is in the 7-8, right? If Embiid comes back, like maybe they can climb up to 6, but like I think that there's like a decent likelihood that Philly is in the 7-8. Like there's no circumstance where I think if Philly has Joel Embiid in like any capacity that they don't come out of the play-in like in one way, shape, or form. So that means you're looking at the other 3 teams and saying one of them can make it. So I think that that's kind of where like if you bet like a Miami no, and I've been saying this forever, so like whatever, I'm like a broken record here, but like the number is just like not really right, because I don't see a scenario where if Miami is playing Philly in a 1-game elimination game with Joel Embiid, where Philly is not favored like relatively significantly. And then if you take that and you say like, all right, well, like they're going to be favored. Miami would probably be favored over Chicago or Atlanta, right? Like if you looked at it that way, then it's like you're getting like a crazy number right now. I think the latest number was around like plus like 700 or something like that for them to miss the playoffs. So if you just looked at it that way and said like, all right, I don't know if they're going to climb to 6 because I think that they're pretty comfortable just playing in the scenario that they are, but also the fact that they're just not that good. Like, I don't know if they could really get up to 6. So maybe that
has nothing to do with this, Joe. This has how good they are has nothing to do with the Miami Heat, whether or not they will win.
Never does. But that is kind of what I'm thinking, though. I think they can lay out a blueprint.
And so I think that this is like a really good, interesting selection for like the listener is like, hey, you're getting like I have to admit, like, yeah, look, logically, 100% plus 700 for a team that's not very good to miss the playoffs. It's a very good number. The breakdown, by the way, if you want it, 10 seeds are 0-6 in making the playoffs. 9 seeds are 3-3. 8 seeds are 3-3. 7 seeds are 6-0. So it's like pretty simple. If you're the 7 seed, you're going to get in. If you're the 10 seed, you're not. If you're 8 or 9, it's a coin flip. That's it.
Yeah. 8-9 being a coin flip is really interesting, given how much like the 8 seed is theoretically so much better. I mean, obviously it's a tiny sample, but that is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating kind of twist on things. All right, it's got to do it for Buckets. Thanks for joining us, guys. Appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure to tune in tomorrow night, 11 Eastern, for Buckets Live with Sean Little and Andrew O'Connor-Watts. You can catch Joe and Jim in the Action Network app. Joe's at Joe Dellera. Jim's at Turvey Bets. We'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for joining us. Till then, let's get buckets.